What's going on, guys? Jacked Up, February 11th, 2025, coming at you on the WTOV 9 digital platforms, Facebook and YouTube. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. On the heels of Super Bowl 59, which means we are embarking on 30 straight weeks, give or take, without professional football, NFL football for that matter. And let it begin. Let the offseason begin in the National Football League on the heels of Eagles 40, Chiefs 22, Philadelphia, their second Super Bowl within the last decade. And they are masterclass when it comes to roster construction, when it comes to execution, and really when it comes to not messing around in NFL football. And I'll get into that in a moment, and what really the Pittsburgh Steelers can take away from Philadelphia hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. Let's look at the Eagles this time last year, right? A collapse like the Steelers had, a first-round exit in the playoffs like the Steelers have had, and they said enough is enough right away. We are too darn talented. We are too darn capable. Let's fix what we've got to fix. Out goes your offensive and defensive coordinator. In comes Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, and you win the Super Bowl. In comes Kellen Moore, announced today as the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Must have done a pretty damn good job as the Eagles offensive coordinator to get that job, number one. And he wasn't even the best coordinator the Eagles had this year. It was Vic Fangio. That defensive performance that Philadelphia had put on the field in New Orleans over the weekend was masterclass, was elite. And yeah, the Eagles scored 40 points, but a large chunk of it was because of the defense. The Cooper DeJean interception return for a touchdown. The interception that put Philadelphia on the doorstep that set up A.J. Brown is the reason why Philadelphia got to hoist the Lombardi Trophy when it was all said and done. And all against Patrick Mahomes, all against the Green Goblin, all against the big bad Mahomes, the big bad Andy Reid. They made them look elementary. They made Mahomes not look like the guy that we had been debating whether or not he was already a better quarterback all time than Tom Brady, especially if the Chiefs were able to compete the Super Bowl three-peat, something that a team has never done before. We're going to get into that in a moment too. There was a comment made on social media by a previous Jacked Up guest that I'm going to poke a little bit of fun at. And if you follow me on socials, you probably saw my interaction with said person during the Super Bowl. But again, this goes back to Philadelphia being kings in the National Football League, obviously because they're Super Bowl champions. But as far as constructing a roster is Howie Roseman. I tweeted this and I stand by it. Howie Roseman, right now, especially since they won a second Super Bowl, Hall of Fame general manager in the National Football League. You look at that Eagles roster, top to bottom, and it was the best roster in football this year. You look at what they were able to do to overhaul disappointment. They fire their coordinators. They bring in a guy like Vic Fangio on defense. They go out and draft two fantastic corners in Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. DeJean, obviously, the interception return for a touchdown early in the ball game. You pair him with CJ Gardner-Johnson and Darius Slay, who were two pretty darn good defensive backs to begin with, but they become instantly younger and they become instantly better in that cornerback and defensive backs room. Up front, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter. In the front seven with Defensive Player of the Year candidate Zach Bond. They draft well, they sign well. On the offensive side of the ball, they draft well, they sign well. Offensive line, you replace Cam Jurgens with Jason Kelce. That offensive line hadn't skipped a beat. You draft well. You sign well. Mekhi Becton, for all accounts, was a bust when it came to being an offensive lineman in the National Football League. Big-time prospect out of Louisville, top 10 pick, didn't pan out in New York. Goes to Philadelphia, and they say, you know what? Let's move you inside. Let's play at right guard. Mekhi Becton is probably going to get a big-time contract extension in Philadelphia or maybe elsewhere in the offseason as a right guard and not an offensive tackle. You draft well, you trade well, you sign well. And when you get those guys in, you got to correctly evaluate the talent, develop that talent. And obviously they did that because they're Super Bowl champs. I'm so envious of Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles organization as somebody who loves the Steelers. And frankly, if you're watching this and you're a Browns fan too, you should also be envious because they did it the right way. They did it the right way. And I don't necessarily know that the guy that won Super Bowl MVP is a bona fide stud franchise quarterback. Jalen Hurts is great. Jalen Hurts is a Super Bowl champion and a Super Bowl MVP. Set the record for most rushing yards by a quarterback in the big game, 72 rushing yards and a touchdown. Outran the guy that carried that offense there in Saquon Barkley. He only had 57 rushing yards. 17 for 22 passing, through the pick. Yeah, sure. It didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. The passer rating was 119. The QBR was over 75. The completion percentage was over 70%. That's all fine and well. But Jalen Hurts still isn't a quarterback like Mahomes and like Allen and like Burrow that are so damn good that really no matter who you put around them on the offensive line and in the skill department, they're going to lift those guys up around them, make them better, and they are going to be playoff contenders because Allen, Burrow, Jackson, Mahomes are your quarterback. That's not Jalen Hurts. Like, if you remember on the New Heights podcast with the Kelsey brothers, I believe this was leading up to the first time these two teams met in the Super Bowl, Hurts and Mahomes, in Super Bowl 57. Jalen Hurts, for the most part, thought he was going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. The 2020 draft, if you remember, the Steelers traded their first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick, didn't pick until the second round. Jalen Hurts was on the board when the Steelers selected Chase Claypool. I believe it was 49th overall. And a lot of mocks had Jalen Hurts going to the Steelers in the second round because there was a need at quarterback. The Steelers needed to figure out what they were doing post Ben Roethlisberger. They obviously didn't figure it out until it was too late. So Hurts thinks he's going to be a Steeler, ends up being an Eagle, and it was the best thing for him. Because if you're a Steelers fan, and even if you're a Browns fan that particularly doesn't like the Steelers but watches them twice a year because you have to, ask yourself this question. You follow the Steelers. Would Jalen Hurts be as good of a quarterback if he was a Pittsburgh Steeler right now? Would he be a Super Bowl champion? Absolutely not. And honestly, I don't think he'd be as good. He'd be run-of-the-mill. He'd be the best quarterback the Steelers have had post-Ben. In hindsight, is 2020 because he'd probably be the only one post-Ben, but he'd be better than Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. He would have been better than Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, or Kenny Pickett. He's obviously better than Kenny Pickett because if he wasn't, Kenny Pickett would have started over him this season. That's neither here or there. But Jalen Hurts as a Steeler would have been run-of-the-mill, would have been middle of the league because there isn't enough around Jalen Hurts with the Steelers that would have made me think otherwise. Go back to when the Steelers would have had the opportunity to select Jalen Hurts in the draft. That offensive line didn't have Zach Frazier. It didn't have Broderick Jones. It didn't have Mason McCormick. It didn't have James Daniels. It didn't have Isaac Seumalo for that matter. It was band-aided together with the likes of Dan Moore, Chuks Okorafor, Trey Turner played guard at that point. You had Kendrick Green over the football. That wouldn't have boded well for a guy like Jalen Hurts. You wouldn't have had Chase Claypool because you would have selected Jalen Hurts, obviously. So you would have had a receiving core with Deontay Johnson and maybe George Pickens and band-aided together with not as good skill players. And look, I'm not taking anything away from Jalen Hurts. I'm not taking anything away from the fact that he played phenomenally in Super Bowl 59 and won Super Bowl MVP and helped his team score 40 points and win the freaking big game. But Jalen Hurts is as good of a quarterback as he is right now is because he's been a Philadelphia Eagle. He's had A.J. Brown. He's had Devontae Smith. He's got Saquon Barkley now. He's got a great offensive line, and he's got great offensive coaching that had put him to this point in his career. He would have had none of that in Pittsburgh. That's why the Steelers are in quarterback purgatory. That's why the Steelers are in offensive purgatory. They don't have their franchise guy under center. They don't have as good a supporting cast in the skill department, which could be fixed in this offseason. I'll get to that in a moment. And they don't have the correct offensive coaching. It's an upgrade. Arthur Smith is eons better than Matt Canada was, but it's still not good enough to compete for Super Bowls in the National Football League. And that's what has to change in the offseason for the Steelers. And if you've seen the scroll on the bottom of the screen, you know, the Steelers, it's no secret, aren't Super Bowl contenders and are very far away from it. What has to change this offseason? Well, it starts with the NFL draft and it starts in free agency. I think that there are a couple of options the Steelers could go in free agency to address offense, but I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, Mike Tomlin to make those moves because in the last couple of years, the buku bucks have been spent on defense. Patrick Queen comes to the Steelers, one of the richest free agent contracts the Steelers have ever signed from an outside free agent, and he plays inside linebacker. Extensions go to Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, you name it, Cam Hayward, you name it, they got it on defense. 3 years, $41 million, a cap hit that's going to be right around 17.5, a little over 17.5 million this year and next year. I don't know that the Steelers are going to make that move on offense because they've done nothing so far in this current administration with Omar Khan and Andy Weidel to prove that. And there are avenues that they can take. There are avenues that they can go and make those moves offensively. T. Higgins is one of them. But I just don't have the confidence that they're going to be able to do it, number one, because they haven't committed that kind of cash to an offensive player. And number two, if I'm T. Higgins, I don't know that I want to come to Pittsburgh because the quarterback situation is up in the air, because the offensive line isn't as good. And honestly, Joe Burrow had talked on Radio Row leading up to Super Bowl 59 and had mentioned, and I forget what show it was, but had mentioned that their mission is to stay together. If I'm T. Higgins, yeah, maybe, you know, I could get 25, 28 million bucks somewhere else, but I want to play with Joe Burrow. And if the Bengals offer versus elsewhere is so drastic to where I have to leave, that's fine. But I'm staying in Cincinnati if I can to play with Joe Burrow. Another team that's going to have the cap space and is floated out there is the New England Patriots. You go to New England, you are the bona fide wide receiver one right away. That is not up for debate. That is up for debate in Pittsburgh because George Pickens right now is still a Steeler. And Drake May might be the next great franchise quarterback in New England. That might be a guy I wouldn't hate to play with. So there's questions there. That's why I think the Steelers go the draft route when it comes to addressing offense and addressing skill players and hit that Ohio State well hard. And we'll talk a lot about the NFL draft throughout the offseason when it comes to who the Browns should take, the Steelers should take. But if I'm the Steelers, I draft Emeka Egbuka in round 1, and I draft Quinshon Judkins in round 2. Egbuka can play in the slot, and I think would be a perfect complement to George Pickens. And Quinshon Judkins is a different runner than Najee Harris. Najee, right now, according to PennStakes.com, is favored to re-sign with the Steelers. According to that website, the Steelers are plus 200 to sign Najee Harris, to run it back with Najee Harris. The Raiders and the Cowboys are plus 600. The Chargers are plus 900. I think LA is where he ends up because Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers are committed to running the football. J.K. Dobbins had a phenomenal year there, but he was on an expiring contract, and Najee's a Cali guy. Grew up rooting for the Raiders. Obviously, they're in Vegas, so they're in play there now, but Najee, for all extensive purposes, returns home, going to L.A., and plays in an offense with a better offensive line, a better quarterback, and an offense that's more well-constructed for Najee Harris to succeed. So I think he goes to the Chargers. And it seems as though right now that Najee Harris is going to be projected around $7.5 million annually for 3, maybe 4 years. The dude's fifth-year option was $6.7 million. So why would the Steelers pay $800,000 to $1 million more than they would have if they would have just picked up the option on the guy? And to me, you don't spend more money when the quarterback question is in the air, when you're going to have to spend more on your quarterback than you did in 2024. And all of that, to me, doesn't add up for a guy to pay a guy whose career averages 3.9 yards a carry. I love Najee as a person. I think he's phenomenal for that locker room, but I just can't justify paying more for the fifth year option when you declined it for a guy that, again, doesn't even average 4 yards a clip for his career, which is why you go get Judkins to pair him with Jalen Ward. I think it would phenomenally upgrade the run game, especially if it's a pretty much 50-50 split. And then in round 3, you address defensive line. Deion Walker from Kentucky is a guy over the nose that I really like. Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, if you really want to run the Ohio State necessarily know if he's going to be there at that point. And also, going back to what I said on the defensive line and the Steelers committing to spending money defensively over offense, go out and get Milton Williams, defensive lineman, defensive tackle from the Eagles, a guy that's just going to be turning 26 years old. You're probably going to have to pay him $20 million a year if you can commit to that, if you can justify that, still spending money like crazy on the defensive side. But that's a guy that's probably not going to get a contract extension in Philadelphia because he's kind of lost in the shuffle on that line with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, and had a career year in 2024, 5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and is an immediate upgrade over Larry Ogunjobi at that position. And you get younger. If you can draft a guy like Deion Walker in the 3rd round and sign Milton Williams, you've got Williams, who will be 26, Keanu Benton, who will be 24, and Walker as a rookie will be 21 in the NFL next season. 3 of your 4 guys under 26 with Cam Hayward, infusion of youth on that defensive line. And for all intents and purposes, and when you ask me, that's a win. A couple more things to address. The GOAT debate with Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. Right now it's over because Tom Brady still is Tom Brady with the Super Bowl stats and the Super Bowl wins. So I teased this earlier in the show. Austin City Limits and I, who was on the show last week, got into it a little bit on social media, and he was very adamant that Tom Brady is still the guy because of how hard it is to win 7 Super Bowls. Guess what? Mahomes is only 29. Brady's been to 10 Super Bowls. All 7 of the 10 Super Bowls that Brady had been to, he was 34 or older. Mahomes isn't even 30 yet. There is still time for Patrick Mahomes to catch up. That's my only point. Right now, Tom Brady, for all intents and purposes, is still the greatest offense or the greatest quarterback of all time. Last thing. Oh, no. Oh, no, here we are. We're still here. I thought the recording stopped. Okay. Let's get back into it. This billboard gets thrown up on the Boulevard of the Allies, paid for by Steelers superfan Kevin Adams. And pardon me while I look it back up, because that was part of the confusion. I thought that I totally screwed up and ended the recording. All right, here we go. Trade Tomlin or sell the team. Billboard shows up on Boulevard of the Allies right in downtown. The standard is mediocrity. Trade Tomlin or sell the team, Rooney. We've had enough. And this billboard was put up and paid for by Kevin Adams, Steelers superfan, does the podcast with Jersey Jerry from Barstool. I've met Kevin. I think Kevin's a good dude. But I'm not sure that the billboard is what this team and the vibe around the city needs right now. Kevin's a successful guy, makes a lot of money, wants to pay for it. By all means, dude, you do you. I mean, it is what it is. The frustration is certainly justified. I just don't know that that's the message that we should be sending around the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. Like when dudes are putting up billboards about Bob Nutting, sell the team, I get it, because there is a serious elongated frustration there. And I don't want to come necessarily to the Rooney's defense and Tomlin's defense, because it's at some point it needs to be enough is enough. But for how much of a fixture the Rooneys are in the city of Pittsburgh, and I hate to say it, but in the grand scheme of things, how successful this franchise has been in the past, nobody has more than 6 Super Bowls. I don't know how fair it is to the ownership and the family to be putting that kind of thing up right now. I get it. I totally get it. Lack of playoff success. The standard is the standard. Doesn't apparently mean what it used to mean. But I don't think we're in billboard territory quite yet. Like how I could see it being justified for the Pirates. Again, you know what? From Kevin Adams' perspective, you make money and you're frustrated. By all means, man, you do you. But I just think we should be pumping the brakes on that for right now. A couple of years down the road, if it continues, and I hate to say that because I don't want it to continue, then yeah. But at the same time, too, enough can be enough. That's it for Jacked Up February 11th, 2025. Again, be sure to like, comment, subscribe on all of the WTOV 9 digital platforms, YouTube and Facebook. We'll be coming at you again next week. Same time, same place. Be sure again to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.